Hey guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about just kind of an introduction to estimating strategy and answer the question, how detailed should my estimates be? Um, as I've taken multiple estimating courses, both through college and graduate um, courses, as well as private courses, I've noticed there's a lot of information on how to put an estimate together, but not a ton of information on when you should get super detailed on an estimate versus when you should kind of hold back. And so hopefully that's what this will cover today. So as you're putting an estimate together, there's a few questions you want to ask yourself before you get started. And one of them is, how detailed can your estimate be? And so as you look at the quality and completion, I also should have put stage of your drawings. Is it a CD or a DD or an SD set? Because depending on that level of detail will determine how you estimate the project. And we'll get into that later. Excuse me, we'll get into that later. Um, the schedule that you have, not necessarily the construction schedule, but the schedule of when your estimate needs to be turned in. Um, Maybe you have a really big estimate that you have to get turned in 1 or 2 weeks, and a detailed takeoff, detailed estimate just isn't possible. That's a consideration. The delivery method, and so if it's a design build or a CMGC or a CMAR where you're kind of coming in early on the pre-construction side and helping with design and kind of giving your input, it's going to look a little bit different versus a hard bid where you essentially have a complete set of drawings and you're going to put a detailed estimate together and then send it off. Um, Availability of cost data. So just funny story real quick. When I made the transition from heavy civil to commercial construction, my first project was a multi-story, multi-family building, and I just went hard on the concrete and excavation quantities, uh, pretty much because that was my background. And I got all the form work, I got all the excavation information, I got um, equipment rates and all this data. And come to find out, the contractor I was working for didn't have any historicals on concrete or excavation, and so my super detailed estimate turned into a really quick cost per cubic yard kind of estimate. So don't make the same mistake I made. If you're building an estimate, make sure you understand what your data looks like first before you start measuring stuff that you just can't price. And then other commitments. So if you're putting an estimate together, you want to look at, is this the most important estimate that you should be working on? And so if you're kind of a one-man show, you're the sole estimator for the company you're working for. If you have four estimates that you want to work on and there's one that kind of takes precedence over the others, it doesn't make a lot of sense to focus on the others and put a ton of time into them before you get this primary estimate done. So these are just some considerations. Um, I'm not sponsored by RS Means. Um, I don't really have any contact with them, but I really like their books. I feel like they're fairly informative, and so I kind of borrowed this from RS Means. I've got a citation here, Mechanical Estimating Methods, fourth edition. But there's three types of estimates that RS Means will lay out, and this is what I really like. So the first one is a conceptual estimate. That's just a very high level, historically, a cost per square foot of building area would be this. And so if you're building, um, let's say, a retail store, maybe a Walmart or a Home Depot, and you've built multiple Walmarts and Home Depots in the past, you could say, okay, historically it's cost us X dollars per square feet. The average square footage of this project is about, I don't know, 250,000 square feet. Um, that's a conceptual estimate. Same thing for cost per megawatt if it's a data center, cost per million gallons of water per day if it's a water treatment plant, and so on and so forth. The next, and I should clarify, a conceptual estimate is really good for a schematic set of drawings. So an SD set or the SD phase of drawings, which is kind of the early side of or the early phase. And then you get to the next phase, the DD, which is design development. And that's when you're going to start getting takeoffs of your concrete, takeoffs of your steel, takeoffs of your roof and your walls. It probably doesn't have as much detail as you would like. And so you'll just kind of get a general takeoff and then measure cost per cubic yard. And so you're not quite measuring formwork yet. Same with wall types. So you'll just Um, Usually a DD set of drawings will have walls laid out, but they won't specify the type or the thickness or the fire rating, stuff like that. And so you'll just kind of say, okay, well, I've got, 1,000 square feet of wall. Um, if it's a fire rated wall for 1 or 2 hours, typically it's this cost per square foot, and so on and so forth. And so that's when you're going to use, or that's what you're going to use for a DD set of drawings. And then finally, a CD set of drawings or an IFP issue for permit or IFC issue for construction. Traditionally, you're going to want to get a little bit more detailed, and that's when you can start getting really, really into the weeds, calculating formwork and rebar and labor and ready mix for concrete, um, assemblies and types for walls, where you would calculate layers of drywall and the drywall type and stud sizes, um, and so on. And I should clarify, not every scope in a detailed estimate is, or excuse me, not every scope in a CD set of drawings is going to be completely detailed out. And so it's important to be strategic about which items that you're going to build a detailed estimate on. Which leads us into our next slide. So um, if you're building a project, or if you're building an estimate and you have a limited amount of time, um, you you want to be strategic about which items that you take off and which items you, or excuse me, which items that you put a detailed estimate to, and which items you maybe, instead of a detailed estimate, do an assembly estimate or a square foot estimate. Um, and so, for example, if I'm a general contractor building a data center, and I have a CD set of drawings, I have a month to put a price together. I'm going to focus very heavily on the MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, with a really heavy focus on the mechanical and electrical, because that's where all my money is. And I may do a takeoff on the steel. I may get just kind of a really easy cost per pound, cost per ton, or maybe cost per joist, cost per column. Uh, but nothing more detailed than that. I'm going to focus on the important item, the MEP, because that's what the owner cares about. That's what I care about. That's where most of my money is first. And then if I have time, I'll go back and get a lot more detailed on the steel. Um, Same thing if I'm a general contractor building a highway, I'm going to put a ton of effort into earthwork. And so, I'm going to focus on cycle times and maybe start allocating equipment, figure out what equipment I want for a really big bridge project or highway project. I'm going to be strategic about my logistics and figure out which batch plants I want to pull from and which subcontractors that, maybe have those operations I want to work with. And then towards the end of the estimate, when it becomes less critical, then I'll focus on things like signage or striping. Um, Still critical to the project. They still need an estimate, but it's not going to get as detailed as my earthwork estimate. And so for signage, I might just get a cost per square foot, um, or just a kind of some other metric. Or if I don't have time for a takeoff, I'll simply send it out to bid, and I'll bid it out with 3 or 4 different companies. And if there's any discrepancies in their numbers, I'm going to reach out to each of them individually, and figure out where the discrepancies are. But the idea is that if I can get 3 bids back from 3 different companies and all their numbers are close, then that gives me a pretty good idea of what the cost will look like. And another thing, I've been talking a lot about general contractors. If you're a subcontractor, if you're a structural concrete contractor on a commercial project, I'm willing to bet that you probably don't care that much about electrical, and that's perfectly fine. Maybe you've got some penetrations that you have to worry about, but subcontractors are going to get typically a lot more specific than general contractors, mostly because they're specialists on their projects, or excuse me, they're specialists with their respective scopes of work. So back to that highway example, if I have a striping estimate that I have to build as a general contractor, I would probably just measure the linear feet of striping I have to take care of. If I'm a striping subcontractor, I'm probably going to be figuring out what my labor looks like, what my paint looks like, what my machinery looks like, my logistics. I'm gonna get a lot more detail than my general contractor, because I have to competitively beat 2 or 3 other contractors, and I want to know exactly what my pricing looks like. For the GC, he just kind of wants a standard price. If it's a little bit higher than what it should be, that's okay. It's not a huge money-making item, and so the GC won't care nearly as much as the subcontractor. I'm going to reiterate, critical items should take precedence on both detail and effort. And so if you have a scope of work that's going to take a significant amount of schedule and the construction, or a significant amount of cost, you typically want to get a lot more detailed than on items that just aren't as costly. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's just kind of how it is. That's how you make a return on your investment as a contractor, is by understanding your high level costs, or excuse me, your big costs first, and then small costs you can put a little bit more effort into once you've got time. And then before you get into a lot of this, you kind of want to ask what items does the owner care about? And so going back to that data center example, the owner cares a lot usually about the kind of electrical equipment that I'm putting into the data center. They're going to care a lot more than the steel, or maybe the exterior facade, or the insulation. The owner still cares about those things, but their main concern, from my perspective, is the electrical, both on a scheduling as well as a cost standpoint. So let's work out a scenario here. You work as an estimator for a mid-sized general contractor. You've been given a 90% DD set of drawings for a 100,000 square foot retail store, and you have 2 weeks to put pricing together. If you do kind of the traditional estimating method and do a detailed estimate, it's going to take, 6 weeks to put an estimate together. So you have to be strategic about which scopes you prioritize. So before you get started, we're going to ask ourselves, what is the general strategy? Which scopes are your main concern, and what other info do you need before pricing? So before we get started, we're going to first look at a few things. One is the relationship with the owner. Now, this is very important because some owners care about some aspects more than others, or some items more than others. And so if this is a national retail chain, the owner is going to care a lot about the exterior facade, a lot of the architectural elements with their logo, with their colors. They're going to be very strict on which colors, paint wise, and maybe layout that they're going to work with. If it's a smaller owner with only a few chains, they may not have a set schedule yet, or a set program. Sorry, not a set schedule. And they're probably really just focused on cost. And so you want to build a quality project within their cost budget, versus the national owner, where they're going to care a little bit more about the image. Which architect you're working for, which sub-consultants you're going to work with. Construction is a relationship based industry, and so hopefully you have a good relationship with the architect. Hopefully you have a good relationship with the sub-consultants, where you can reach out to them and ask them questions, and it's not adversarial. But these are things to consider. Location and schedule are other things to look at, and so if the construction project has a tight schedule, you may want to start focusing on long lead items first with your takeoffs, versus other big value items. And same with schedule, or same with location, where if it's going to take, hiring someone far away, or sending someone close by far away, you have to worry about that in your cost. And so those are things to look out for. Next step is to read the drawings. And so you're going to want to go through and identify which key items should you take off first. And so if you're like me and you kind of have a team to work with, perfect. You're going to assign specialists to different scopes of work. If you have maybe a new graduate or an intern working with you, you might give them some of those easier tasks, just so that they can learn the basics first, and then work up from there. And so in our scenario, this was a DD set of drawings, which means that we're probably going to require an assembly estimate for those key items, and potentially for all items. And so the structural steel may not be completely designed, the foundation may not be completely designed, but we should have a good idea of what it looks like. And so for concrete, we'll probably just get a cost per cubic yard, and maybe make some adjustments based on, hopefully, if we have specs, or if we have some rebar detailing, but we're not going to get too crazy with it. Same with the structural steel, where we're not going to have every single little detail, but we should have enough to give us a cost per ton for our structural steel. Um, and I mentioned before, if there's other items that we just don't have time to do takeoffs on, we're going to send them out to bid. We're going to send everything out to bid, but we're going to send those out to bid. We're going to get numbers back with key information. A lot of subcontractors more and more now are sending in schedules of values where they'll actually send their quantities and unit rates. Super nice if you can get that. If you don't get it, ask for it and see if that subcontractor, if that subcontractor is willing to work with you on it. And that's what you'll do is you'll get those subcontractor numbers back, level them, and try to determine who has the best understanding of the scope of work. And that's if you just absolutely cannot do a takeoff. Obviously, the best practice is to do a takeoff as much as possible. And from there, you would put your estimate together. So other considerations. An estimate has two purposes. And so when we get a set of drawings as estimators, our natural instinct is just to go and start reading plans and measuring things. That's certainly always my temptation. But we have to keep in mind that the estimate serves two purposes. One is to give the owner a valuation of their project. And so this is, we just talked about reaching out to subcontractors for pricing because they're specialists. That's how an owner will see a general contractor. The owner reaches out to the GC to get a valuation of their investment, because usually a construction project for the owner is an investment. Now, for the contractor, it's also an investment. The time it takes to build a project, the amount of money that we charge the owner, that's an investment. And so we need to understand what our cost is in order to understand what our return can be. And so those are the two main purposes of an estimate. And so we want to ask ourselves, as we're doing takeoff, as we're building pricing, is this serving one of those two purposes? Is this a value added activity? If I go through and measure striping on a $1 billion highway project, and the striping is less than 1% of the overall cost, I should probably focus on other scopes first before I focus on the striping, because I want to know what my value-added activities are, if there's an opportunity for value engineering or some sort of cost reduction. I want to focus on those big ticket items first and then put my energy into smaller items. And then you want to ask, is your estimate too detailed? And so there's a fine balance of building a good estimate, a detailed estimate, and also not completely burdening yourself to the point where you can't focus on other tasks. It's not uncommon to have 2 or 3 projects going on at once, and you want to be able to know that you know how to juggle them. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much.